What's up, Ionics? Welcome back to a new quick win on how to create a bottom drawer with Ionic and Angular. This is a cool component I saw recently inside a Swift tutorial for iOS, which looks pretty cool. And I also saw this in a tutorial by Aaron Saunders, who's doing a great job creating tutorials mostly around React. And I thought maybe we can adopt this for Angular, and I also changed a few things that I thought could be improved. So let's do this. I've created a blank new Ionic application as usually. I always recommend Capacitor by now, and the only thing we need right now is a new module which will hold our components and a new component. So I wanted to create this in a component so you can easily reuse this in your own application. In the original post everything was in one page, but I think this approach really helps you to use the code right away in your application. So whenever you got a shared components file like this, you add your new component, which is called the draw component, in our case, to the declarations, and then also to the array of exports. Once you've done this with the shared components file, you can now import this module basically everywhere in your application. And we will import it inside the home module. So go ahead, shared components module, there we go. And now our homepage is set up to use this module right in our home page. Also, within the shared components module, one important part is to import the Ionic module, because usually in your components, even if there are custom components in your Ionic application, you want to use something like ion list, item, whatever, anything, any component that starts with ion. And therefore you also need to import the Ionic module into your shared components module file. So I would say we directly add this. Usually when you add a new component, it has the name app / your name for the component. So I will just use this. Of course, feel free to change the name. So let's use just app drawer right inside our home page. And if we save this and run this, we already see the draw component works. But of course, we need to add a bit more content in here. So as you've seen in the beginning, in the quick animation, this is a component like a box that we can pull up and down, release and flip up or down. So we need to attach a lot of gestures. We need a somewhat unique UI. So therefore, let's just create a new div element and we will give it the class drawer. And we might also need a reference to this element as a view child. So therefore, we use this approach. Now, I also wanted to add a little button, which is always this, we can't see it right here, which mostly looks like this thing right here, but a little bit more gray and inside that box. That's the usual pattern I've seen in the past, so I want to replicate this. I will just do this with an ion button and some additional styling. So let's center the ion button fill. Clear. I don't want to have any background on this, or I actually want to have background, but a very specific background. I want to expand full, and I also would like to attach a little click event here to toggle the draw. So when you click on that area, it will immediately flip up that box. And within the button, we will simply add the drawer pull, which will basically be this horizontal bar icon thing, whatever you want to call it. So let's add this function right here before I forget about it. And then additionally, after the button comes just random whatever you want. So I will just put in ion list. Maybe we'll do a few more items right here, but that's just for testing today. You can put in anything you want. Now, if we check out this, well, it's not really a bottom drawer. So let's get into some CSS for this. First of all, we want to position the drawer somewhere else. So we will use position absolute actually. We will give it a little bit of box shadow. I took this box shadow from the Ion card. So I didn't came up with these cool values. They were just, well, they were for the Ion card. You should give it a width of 100. If you want to, you can also set the border radius, which are like the edges you see at the top, to whatever looks good for you. And then we can take a first look. Now it looks already a bit different, but that's still not what we want. We need to position it at the bottom. So what we're gonna do is we will put it to the bottom, and usually I wanted to do something like minus 77 view height, and then I want to set the actual height to something like this. So this would already move the box to the bottom. You see it right here. We will take care of this behavior in a second. But that's kind of hard for different devices. So what I came up instead is using a little calculation and adding the environment safe area inset bottom, because on iOS you also got this bottom area that you should take care of. So we will use this approach instead. I'll keep the height to 80 view height. If you experience any problems, you might tweak a little bit more on these values and also the values we will later use in the JavaScript code, but that's for now a good idea. We will also set the index for a reason, because we later want to have a little backdrop here, and then we can make sure that this box is always above the backdrop. And because the backdrop is somehow applying its own color to our box, we will set the background for our drawer by default to white. It looked so good before. Why are you wrong right now? Anyway, let's quickly also do the CSS for the pull icon, which should be just like a little gray icon in here. So give it a little bit of background, width and height, and then you got this nice thingy right here, which should be actually at the bottom of our file. I'm not sure why it is there right now. So what we saw before is that we were actually able to scroll this page, which can be tricky with this draw component. Therefore I came up, or I actually saw this on Aaron's post as well. You can set the scroll Y value to false, which prevents the scrolling, and then make sure the component is at the right place. But as far as I know, let me quickly check this. As far as I know, the component should be at the bottom with exactly this CSS. So let me quickly take a look. Okay, a little typo can make a huge difference. So of course this is safe area inset bottom, and I also changed the value a tiny bit. So now it's positioned completely correctly, and we can leave the CSS and we can leave the spec file of course as well. And let's focus on the drawer component, which is really the most important part in here. First of all, we need access to our view child, which is the drawer. We gave it already the element name, and we also want to read the element reference. I think actually we're just using a div element, so we don't really have to, but it should be fine as well like this. Also, I want to output to the parent component if the drawer is currently open or closed. Why? Because then we can easily display our backdrop. So if we toggle it right here, we would perform the toggle, we would open it, but the parent component wouldn't know about this. And an easy way to send some information back to the parent component is using the add output annotation, and we will call this open state changed. And let's call this one open state. It's a new event emitter with a boolean, so it will just return true or false if the drawer is opened or not, and then new event emitter, and we're fine here. So that's the way to send some information back to the parent component. To catch this in our homepage, we can easily use our app drawer right here and say open state changed, and when this happens, please call our function toggle backdrop. And within the event, there's actually the value true or false. So that's really super easy to catch. Let's go back to the drawer component on which we will really want to focus. So then we also want to internally keep track if the component is open. Of course, in the beginning it's not. And then I also want to take care of the OpenHead a bit more dynamic. So in Aaron's tutorial, he used a fixed pixel value for both the bottom and the height. Then it works kind of great, and you can easily position it. If that works for you, then really I recommend to use the fixed values. I just wanted to find a more dynamic way of doing this, so that's why we will get the OpenHead from the platform. And we need to do this not in our OnInit, but actually in the after view init. And then we can change this to async after view ng after view init. And now within this function, all our elements are initialized. So we can first of all access the actual drawer, which is our drawer viewchild.native element. So we don't have to type native element all the time. And then we can set our OpenHead to this platform, which we should maybe inject private platform from Ionic Angular, and then simply call Head. And because our view is currently about, well, this value, let's try something out. So in all those places where you see my strange calculation, it's not 100% there yet. If you want to make this really perfect component, you might play around with a few values here and there. So that's just a little disclaimer. And now the funny thing begins where we use the gesture controller from Ionic. We can now create a new gesture. We've done this in the past maybe already, and this time it will be a bit more challenging. The easy part is specifying on which component we want to add this gesture and specifying a gesture name. Let's just call this swipe. And the direction is actually this axis because we just want to go up and down. We don't want to go right or left. And now we can specify for OnMove a function, and we can move, say, for onEnd. You could also use onStart, but in this case, I don't think we need onStart. And before I forget about this, after you've set up the gesture, call gesture enable. And I think for some reason you have to pass through, so that's fine. All right, that's it so far. Now the OnMove calculation is actually pretty easy. Maybe we'll lock out the event first of all, and then also do it in here so you see that we actually already applied this. So will be a bit tricky yeah, there we got actually a few events. And the interesting part is the delta part right here, because that specifies how far the touch moved up. In general, whenever this value is changed or gets passed to the onMove function, we simply want to reposition our drawer component. And we can do this by calling drawer style transform and call translate y and set this to, let's see, minus, nope, event delta y pixel, and somewhere we need to close that. So that's the general idea. Now we actually should already be able to, no, of course we're not. Actually, it's not too crazy. If you just make spelling typos like this in your translate function, then it's no wonder that nothing changes. So now I can move this one around, but we see we should maybe limit this, because at this point we should maybe stop up bringing it up, and therefore we will add a little if block here. So if the delta is lower than this dot OpenHead, then we will just return, which means at some point we just stop doing our transformation. So let's quickly save this, and I can also comment in my part once again, because there wasn't really the problem. The problem was something else. So there we go. I can bring it up and it stops at some point, and I can also bring it down. If you're fine with this, not sure, I somehow flipped away. If you're already fine with this, then great, but usually you also want to implement a little bit onEnd, because that should solve some of the problems and you can do a bit more in the end. For this, I will bring in a bit of code, which we will take a look at. So if the drawer is not yet open and our delta is below this value, which you can also change, it means we came from the bottom and we moved for a certain area, which usually means the user wants to flip open something. And in that case, we will automatically do a little transformation right here. We will translate it completely to the OpenHead, and we will talk about this as well. Other case is it is already open and we're moving it from the top back to the bottom with a little flip. So you can change this, something between 50 and 100 work great for me in terms of mimic a swipe event. Maybe we could actually attach another swipe event. Not sure about that though. So in that case, it will just go back to normal. Additionally, we finally use our event emitter in here because this is a place where we say it was completely opened or it was completely closed. So we will emit either false or true, and we will keep track of this. Actually, not sure. Maybe we use it in here. So that's why we use this. Now we can also go to our toggle drawer because this is basically what we need in here as well. So the toggle is when we click on this little icon, we get a reference to our native element. We will emit the state before we actually do anything else because I felt like that's working better in terms of displaying a little backdrop fade animation. And then if it's already open, we will close it, and otherwise we will open it using the same functionality. So if I now click on it, I can toggle it. Toggle backdrop, yeah, we haven't implemented that. But that works already pretty great. I can also flip it up and flip it back to the bottom. Works great as well, and I can still open it. So in terms of the general draw functionality, we already got everything in here. Now it's time to focus a little bit more on our backdrop component, which we want to add to the home page. So within here, I will now use a simple div. There is actually an Ion backdrop, which didn't really work great for me. I now tried it a few times, but it never really worked for me. And we will add an ng class, which will conditionally apply a class. Now, our homepage is actually pretty easy. We will just have one backdrop visible, and hopefully don't make any typos today anymore. And then we got our toggle backdrop, which will simply have the value is visible. And then we can set our this backdrop visible to is visible. So this will simply change the value. TypeScript is happy, and we can make the ng class depending on our backdrop visible. So hello, backdrop visible. If the backdrop is visible, we will add the class fade in, and otherwise we will just use the class fade. I also want to do a little toggle from buttons, so I will also add a button. That's something you also see in some applications where on button click, for example in the Todoist application, the draw comes up. So you can easily do this by directly calling the function on the component if you use a reference like this. So let's add draw, and then the button could simply directly call draw toggle draw. For our backdrop, I also want to do the same. So if we click on the backdrop, we will also call the same functionality. Now, of course, right now we don't really have any backdrop because, or maybe we have backdrop. This function works, that's cool, but we don't have the CSS for it yet. So for the backdrop, I will just bring in this little code, completely fill out the screen, use black color with a bit of alpha here, right there. So that's why we got 8 characters in the hex code and the position 10. Remember, our draw had the position 11 and position absolute. Now it's immediately visible, and the reason is that we haven't faded it out. So there's the fade and the fade out class that get added, or that are added based on the backdrop visible right here. That's just a conditional class, and our conditional class in the fade, which is the standard case, means opacity at 0. And I will also move it in the back because in the case it's invisible, I also don't want to see any touch event on my backdrop. Otherwise, we will fade it in, and we add an index then. We will see. So now, you see we got a nice transition, and I can also click my backdrop. And now the cool thing is, remember, we added the event emitter to our component. So even if we just interact with the component, the information gets returned to our view. And I think that's pretty cool. Now, what's not working yet is swiping them out. The reason is, actually I don't know completely what the reason is, but the problem is that this code actually runs. So let's just add something in here. Change is visible. Why can't you just complete this? The problem isn't that the function isn't called. So when I swipe it up, change true, change false. So everything's fine, but the backdrop isn't displaying. And usually that means something inside the internal Angular change detection isn't correctly wired up in your case. And you can easily fix those things using the change detector ref. So let's do this, change detector ref. And after changing our value, we will call this and call detect changes, which is basically like telling Angular, please, could you just check if there were changes? And the reason or the solution now works. It's the same like before. We're just telling Angular, gee, please, can you check again? Maybe there are some changes in the view that you should render and change. And now we got our nice little draw. We can pull it out, we can pull it in, we can open it from the button. And the only thing you might need to change is a bit more CSS or fine tuning for the different values, like the height or how far you pull it in, or when you release it based on the delta, when it should flip up or down. But that's really up to you. And I hope you enjoyed this component. This is really a component I saw in a lot of native applications. And once again, we can replicate it with Ionic to spice up our applications. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and stay subscribed so you get notified about all the new tutorials, quick wins, and other app development and web development videos on this channel. If you want to learn more about Ionic with in-depth courses, a community of like-minded developers so you can learn and build your apps faster, you should definitely check out the Ionic Academy, which is my code school to help you with everything Ionic, with a huge library of courses, material, and a supportive Slack channel so we can get your app out. I hope you enjoyed this video. I will see you inside the next video. Have a great day and happy coding. Simon.